We'll start with Tony, and then Bertie. I'm just going round in the order I'm seeing people. Bertie, Janet, Pete, and Richard, and then we'll look again.
I don't know whether you can answer this, Anne. I mean, one of my concerns at the moment is the transatlantic free trade agreement. Is a concern of the branch as well. We've got a motion to Congress about this, and one of the facets of the trade agreement is the investor-state dispute settlement program, whereby multinational corporations that feel that the actions of governments that are threatening their ability to maximise profits can actually sue the governments for that. And one of the, I remember that the problem is once you get involved in a campaign like this, you're inundated with information, and I can't actually remember the exact details of this, but I do remember reading that at least one multinational corporation had threatened to sue the Egyptian government because of plans the Egyptian government had to initiate a minimum wage. I don't know whether you know anything about that.
Are you sure it was about the minimum wage? I think it was about the renationalisation of a number of companies that were... There's about 5 or 6 companies, including Tanta Flax, Shabinal Con Spinning, Steam Boilers Company, can't remember the rest. There's also Omar Effendi, which is a big chain of department stores. And what happened with this is that privatisation took place before the revolution, sold off by the government. The workers and trade union campaigning organisations and so on took up cases in the courts which challenged the privatisation process, and they actually won the case. The judgment came out in 2011, which demanded that the Egyptian government restore these to public ownership, which the Egyptian government then refused to do, and appealed against its own court to try and stop them doing this. But I think in the process, though, some of the investors also then threatened to sue the Egyptian government over this.
Oh,
so I think that might be the case. But I haven't heard of anything in relation to the minimum wage, because there has been a minimum wage. Well, the minimum wage in Egypt is applies to the public sector, not to the private sector at all. This is a big bone of contention in any case, but it only applies to some parts of the public sector. So it seems unlikely they would be complaining about that, I think.
Thank you. Could we ask then Bertie and then Janet to...
It's interesting to recognise European or British support for Egyptians or North American or North African countries having various types of revolution and political uprising and so on. But in the case of Egypt, I wonder whether you think your organization can get very far without focusing some attention on the United States and possibly Israel with regard to the problems that are the Egyptian revolution, or the, what was it called, the something spring? The Arab Spring. Where does your organization fit in looking at this issue?
Okay, in relation to the United States, we obviously have similar condemnations of the US government's role as we do of our own government, but I mean, we are actually, based in the UK. Although we do work with colleagues in the US, and in fact we have quite a number of people who sign our statements internationally are from the US, but we feel that in terms of where we can take action, we actually need to focus on our own government, where we can have more direct access to them. Of course, there are limits to what you can do in terms of campaigning. So I take your points. In relation to the question around Israel, I mean, where we stand on that issue is that because the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has been around for a long time, we didn't want to encroach on the kind of trade union work that they've done very well for many years. But we also agreed that our position is essentially the same as theirs. We are in solidarity with the Palestinian people against Israeli occupation and so on. It's just that we don't particularly work on Palestine for reasons of not wanting to duplicate good work that's been done elsewhere. I mean, was also involved in Palestine solidarity work for several years beforehand. Where we thought there was a gap was in the other countries in the region, which, as a result of the Arab Spring, the Arab revolutions, suddenly we saw the emergence of new independent workers' movements and a wave of struggles that I hadn't seen on a previous scale. So that was where we felt there was something missing, and we wanted to act in solidarity. But in terms of the basic position, that's where we come from on this issue.
Are you optimistic about successful political outcomes in Egypt with regard to the present repression?
I think I'm not currently optimistic that there is going to be an easy solution to the problem of the military regime. I do think, though, that there is the current regime has a lot of problems. One of the things that it hasn't managed to do is it's not been able to so far crush the workers' movement. I mean, because it's a very short presentation, I couldn't really speak at length about some of the broader issues that are happening. But for example, there are 150 odd strikes between January this year and around March this year, mainly over the question of the minimum wage, actually, demanding the minimum wage be applied to large numbers of other workplaces. Now that's a huge group of people who are prepared to take action in defiance of the military, because striking is pretty much illegal, and facing enormous repression. And there's a real strength there, potentially. The problem is it's not very much connected with the repression, resistance to the repression on political grounds, so that they're not really linked up with, say, what's happening in the universities or defending the student movement and so on. And that's one of the key problems, I think.
The next person was Pete.
No, you didn't want to. Richard, come on.
Actually, you more or less answered my question, which was going to be about the independent trade unions. I mean, to what extent are the independent trade unions themselves coming under fire, or are they being left alone a bit by the government until it's dealt with other people?
Well, where strike action is happening, then there is quite specific and serious repression. So, for example, the postal workers had a national strike over the last few weeks, and several of their leaders in Alexandria, for example, were seized from their homes in dawn raids. There's been, attempts to kind of break the strike by force in that respect. And they're one of the major important independent unions. The main independent union federation actually was largely supportive of the military. People in the leadership of it were largely supportive of the military back in last July. One or two people, like Fatma Ramadan, for example, who's the leading left-wing trade unionist, took a very courageous stand opposing the military, but the military was able to win actually political support from some of the key independent trade union leaders, like Kamal Abu Aita, who was the president of the Independent Union Federation and then was given a job as Minister of Labour shortly afterwards. And that's, so in terms of so therefore it's fairly there's fairly complicated or complex and very contradictory political stances within the different independent unions, which means that they're not really the primary target unless they're on strike, in which case then they are facing repression. But there hasn't been a wholesale attempt to sort of, to try and ban them or smash them up organisationally yet.
Thank you. Steve.
I note that there is a motion on Egypt from the University of Brighton to this year's Congress,
Yes.
which calls for support for men of solidarity, unconditional release of imprisonment, repeal of Law 107, etc., etc. I assume that our delegate, who I note has been taking notes of what's being said, we would encourage our delegate to liaise with you if you're going to be there, if anything because very often these things written well beforehand need to be nuanced at the time, at least for someone to get up and say or to facilitate in some manner. So could I...
You're not suggesting robust support.
The word robust will creep into every one of your speeches, Tony, I'm sure. Yeah, that's...
Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah,
Please
so
do
I think
support
we can agree to support that motion, yeah?
Yes, that would be great. I mean, the motion, we put the motion forward. I mean, I wrote it. We put the motion forward, not in relation to affiliation, obviously, because he was already affiliated, but in order to really raise the issue at Congress and get it on the agenda. And we're hoping it will be the launch pad for, a campaign in the new academic year, and that's really the purpose of it. Yes.
Good.
Thank you, Jan.
One of the problems at the time of the what we thought was going to be a successful rising was the polarisation between the two groups, and then that caused the second. How far, with the experience of this crackdown, are people now getting together and recognising that their differences have to be solved? And also, are there any of the trade unionists or academics able to travel out of Egypt to talk to us and explain their problems? That, can they travel, or will they be penalised when they go back and then be subject to imprisonment or whatever?
In relation to the first point, I mean, I think there's quite probably a number of people who perhaps were supportive of the military initially in July last year, may well have reconsidered and felt that because the military posed as being protecting the revolution. Morsi's government was very unpopular at the end. There was a huge wave of protest against it. And that the military, was able to ride on the back of that, even though it had its own very counter-revolutionary agenda. The problem is, though, that there is an enormous level of fear, and and the repression is very great, so that people don't necessarily feel that they can speak up, and the military has focused very, very strongly on trying to present the Brotherhood as a bunch of terrorists, and quite successfully demonising the Brotherhood, so that anyone who stands up and says anything about it is risking being denounced as a terrorist, and there will be people who will still listen to that, because the military essentially said to people, if you don't trust us, then the state will collapse, society will collapse. There is no alternative but us. And people were very frightened, and they remain so, unfortunately. So, in relation to the second question, well, that's connected in that, yes, it is very, very difficult for Egyptian. I think it'd be really difficult to ask somebody, an Egyptian, to come here and do some kind of public speaking or talk around this, because our experience, we're in constant contact with people there, human rights activists and trade unionists and political activists, but they've all been telling us that actually it's incredibly difficult for them to be associated with campaigning that goes on outside, because one of the big weapons in the military's hand is it says that this is all a foreign plot, this is all a plot, it's a plot by Israel, it's a plot by the United States, it's a plot by whoever, and that therefore it actually is dangerous for people to be openly associated with that and to come here. So I think that's not really on the cards at the moment. We do have, a number of the people who signed our founding statement for the Egypt Solidarity Initiative are in fact Egyptian academics, for example, based in this country. And we have a workshop coming up which I'll be sending out publicity for quite soon, in May, where one of them will be speaking, which is a colleague of mine from Cambridge, Abdulrahman, who's works in development studies, and so she's willing to speak up. She's not based in Egypt, and I think that's for the foreseeable future we're probably going to have to rely on that rather than bringing people over.
Thank you.
Can I
just ask then, before we take Tony, I think we should formally ask if anybody wants to propose that we continue for another 10 minutes or something, just because that's how I think you're supposed to do it.
Is there an issue there?
I actually have a meeting with Rob Copeland sort of now. I'm sure he'd be fine if it's not 5 minutes.
Well,
I just don't want to keep him waiting too long.
we won't ask for a formal anything in that case. But a quick last question then from Tony.
I wonder if you're able to, in a sense perhaps you might have implicitly answered some of this, but the ability of people like the Revolutionary Socialist Group to continue organising. I mean, during the uprising itself, spokespeople not only from the Revolutionary Socialist Group, but from the independent unions were able to visit Marxism, for example, in a number of years. And I wondered, well, one, are they still able to leave the country? I think in a sense you've answered that. And how do they manage to organise on the street?
Well, I think if you look, there's actually not that much organising that's going on vocally on the streets at the moment. The last major attempt to have big street protests was around the anniversary of the revolution, 25th of January, and people withdrew within 20 minutes because they were being shot at with live ammunition, and around 100 people were killed over a number of different protests around Cairo. So, but I mean, yes, for example, the 6th of April and the Revolutionary Socialists and other groups that are not the Muslim Brotherhood, mainly allied together through the Revolutionary Front called Thawar, which stands for Revolutionaries. They have been continuing to work. So, for example, they are involved with activities around the university campuses, and they are involved in mobilising support for strikes and things like that, and they're still able to have some kind of a public presence, but they are also very much potentially in the firing line. I mean, people from the 6th of April youth movement key people already in jail, like Ahmed Mahmoud, who was one of the founders of the group, has already been sent down for several years for defying the anti-protest law. One of the leading figures in the Revolutionary Socialists from Alexandria, Mahina al-Nasri, has been sentenced to 2 years in jail, although she's actually not in jail at the moment. She could be arrested at any time, and she was sentenced in absentia. So the crackdown could easily extend to other groups. I think people are just attempting to carry on as far as they can, knowing that they could at any moment face really severe repression. So it's a difficult situation for anyone who's opposing the regime at the moment.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Because I've got to go, I wondered, I could, if people would like to leave their email addresses, so to go on our
Mail it to me, and I will make sure it gets back to you.
and then pass that around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Very interesting.
And well, concretely, with the pamphlet when it comes out, if that's something that the branch.
Yes, we will be very good.
That would be
Thank you. Right.